Some stories refuse to stay buried. They sit in the quiet corners of your heart, waiting for the right moment, the right words, the right courage. This is one of those stories. I've carried it with me for nearly 18 years, not out of shame, but because I never knew how to put it into words. When you're a child, you don't have the vocabulary for mysteries. When you grow up, you have too many words, and most of them are wrong. So I waited. And maybe now is the time. My name is Tommaso Ferrante. I'm 25 years old. I have a job I love, people who matter to me, a life that feels whole. But it wasn't always this way. There was a time when I didn't know what love meant. A time when silence was my only language and fear my only companion. There was a time when I existed, but didn't really live. Then, in a garden in Assisi, everything changed. But before I tell you about that garden, I need to tell you about the people who found me, about Riccardo and Giuliana, about my parents. Because my story doesn't begin with me. It begins with them, with their heartache, their hope, and a love stubborn enough to refuse surrender. Riccardo Ferrante was 32 when he married Giuliana Marini in a small church on the outskirts of Bologna on a September day, so bright it felt like a promise. She was 29, taught middle school Italian, and had the kind of quiet beauty that doesn't strike you at first, but stays with you forever. He was an engineer who designed bridges, a practical man of few words, with large hands and a heart he kept hidden. They'd met at a dinner party, one of those evenings where nobody expects anything and everything happens. Giuliana remembered that Riccardo barely spoke all night, but he looked at her in a way that made her feel truly seen, like he could read something in her that others missed. When he asked to walk her home, she said yes. That yes was the beginning of everything. Their courtship was slow, respectful, old-fashioned. Riccardo wasn't one for grand romantic gestures, but he had a way of caring for her that spoke louder than any words. He'd bring her coffee when she was studying for exams. He'd fix her car without being asked. He'd listen for hours when she complained about difficult students, never interrupting, never judging. And Giuliana, who'd grown up with an absent father and a mother too exhausted to love her the way she deserved, found in this quiet man something she didn't even know she was looking for: safety. Their wedding was simple. They bought a modest but bright house in a quiet neighborhood, with a small backyard where Giuliana dreamed of watching their children play, because children were always part of the plan, always. They'd talk about it at night before falling asleep, imagining names, imagining faces, imagining laughter. 2 kids, maybe 3, a real family. But time passed, and that house stayed silent. The first year, they blamed it on timing. The second year, questions began to surface, but they kept them to themselves, as if naming them might make them real. The third year, Giuliana started counting days, hoping and being disappointed. Every month became a small funeral. She started avoiding friends who had children, crossing the street when she saw a pregnant woman, crying at commercials for baby products. They saw doctors. First one, then another, tests, procedures, clinical words they didn't understand and didn't want to. After all that searching, the verdict came: unexplained infertility. A diagnosis that wasn't really a diagnosis. An elegant way of saying, we don't know why, but you can't have children. Nothing wrong with him, nothing wrong with her. Life had simply decided no. Giuliana wept for days, never in front of Riccardo. She'd cry at night in the bathroom, running the faucet to cover her sobs. But Riccardo heard everything: the empty bed beside him, the footsteps toward the bathroom, a silence louder than any crying. He suffered too, in his own way, that masculine kind of suffering that finds no outlet, that builds up inside like pressure behind a dam. One evening, Riccardo found her in the bathroom. She wasn't crying. She was just sitting on the edge of the tub, staring at nothing. He sat down beside her without a word. They stayed like that for what felt like forever. Then Giuliana spoke, in a voice that didn't sound like hers. "I feel broken, Riccardo. Like there's a piece of me missing." Riccardo didn't answer right away. He wasn't good with words. But that night, for the first time in their life together, he cried too. And as tears streamed down his face, he held his wife and said, "You're not broken. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. And we'll find a way, I promise." They tried treatments. IVF, injections, medications. Juliana's body became a battlefield, covered in bruises and filled with hope. The hormones made her irritable, emotional, unstable. Ricardo learned to walk on eggshells, to weigh every word, to be present without being intrusive. Each treatment cycle cost thousands of euros. Ricardo worked overtime, gave up vacations, sold the new car he'd just bought. He didn't care. He would have sold everything to give Juliana what she wanted, what they both wanted. The first attempt failed. So did the second. The third looked promising, and for 2 weeks they lived on hope. Then the results came. Negative, as always. After the fifth failed attempt, something broke in Juliana. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply stopped hoping. That was the night something shattered for good. And that was the night something new began to grow. It was Juliana who first mentioned adoption. She said it one Sunday morning while making coffee. Her voice so casual she might have been talking about the weather. "We could adopt," she said. Ricardo looked up from his newspaper. He looked at her for a long time. He didn't answer immediately. Juliana thought he'd say no, that he'd want to keep trying. Instead, he simply said, "Yes, we could." It wasn't an easy decision. It wasn't quick. Weeks of discussions, doubts, fears. Ricardo worried he couldn't love a child who wasn't biologically his the way he'd love one who was. It was a fear he was ashamed to admit. "What if I feel nothing?" he asked Juliana one evening. "What if I look at him and just see a stranger?" Juliana took his hand. "Love isn't automatic, even with biological children," she said. "Love is built, nurtured, chosen every day. And we're good at building things, Ricardo. You build bridges. I build futures. We can build a family." Juliana had different fears. She worried she wouldn't be enough, that she couldn't give an already wounded child what he needed. But in the end, they both understood that love isn't measured by blood. Love is built day by day, gesture by gesture, and they were ready to build. The adoption process was long and exhausting. Documents, interviews, psychological evaluations. They had to prove they were fit, as if love were something that could be certified. Social workers came to their home, inspected rooms, asked invasive questions. But they persisted. For that child they didn't know yet, but already loved. Juliana prepared the bedroom months in advance, even though they didn't know who would occupy it. She painted the walls a soft blue, bought stuffed animals and picture books, put glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Ricardo watched her without comment, but every evening before bed, he'd step into that empty room and stand there for a few minutes, imagining laughter, tears, hugs, imagining a life that hadn't begun yet but already existed in his heart. After nearly 2 years of waiting, the call came. There was a boy, 7 years old, in an institution near Milan. They didn't know much about him, only that he'd been abandoned very young, had no memory of his biological parents, and was different. Different was the word the social worker used. "He's a very quiet child," she explained. "He doesn't cause problems, but he doesn't form bonds either. It's like he's somewhere else." Ricardo and Juliana looked at each other. Neither said a word, but they both already knew. They knew it the way you know important things, without logic, without explanation. That boy was theirs. The day they went to the institution, it was raining, a light, steady rain that seemed to want to wash the world clean. Juliana had dressed carefully, choosing a floral dress she hoped would seem cheerful and welcoming. Ricardo wore his usual light blue shirt, the one Juliana said brought out his eyes. They were more nervous than they'd ever been in their lives. The institution was a gray, anonymous building with a concrete courtyard and a few bare trees. Inside, the smell of disinfectant and cafeteria food, children running through hallways, voices, laughter, crying, but not the child they were looking for. The social worker guided them through long, bare corridors, past rooms full of bunk beds, playrooms with broken toys, bathrooms with chipped tiles. Juliana felt her heart tighten. These children lived here, slept here, ate here, grew up here, without a family, without a good night hug, without someone to call their name with love. They found him at the end of a hallway, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall. He wasn't playing, wasn't reading, wasn't doing anything. He was simply there, knees pulled to his chest, eyes fixed on nothing. He was small for his age, thin, with dark hair falling across his forehead. He wore clothes too big for him, probably donated, and worn-out sneakers. When he heard footsteps approaching, he looked up, and Juliana stopped cold. Those eyes, they weren't a child's eyes. They were old eyes, eyes that had seen too much, eyes that had stopped expecting anything. There was no curiosity in that gaze, no hope, no fear, just an immense emptiness, an absence that hurt to witness. It was like looking into a bottomless well. "Hi," Juliana said, kneeling down to his level, her knees aching on the cold floor. "My name is Juliana, and this is Ricardo." The boy didn't respond, didn't move. He kept looking at her with those empty eyes, as if waiting for them to leave like everyone else, as if he already knew how it would end. "We came to meet you," Juliana continued, her voice trembling slightly. "If you'd like." Nothing. Silence. The social worker cleared her throat. "As I mentioned, Tommaso is a very different child. He almost never speaks. He almost never cries. He almost never asks for anything. It's like he learned not to exist, so as not to disturb anyone." Juliana felt tears fill her eyes. A child who had learned not to exist. What kind of world was this, where a 7-year-old had to learn to make himself invisible to survive? Ricardo knelt down too. He didn't say anything. He simply sat on the floor next to the boy, back against the wall like him. Juliana looked at him, surprised. This wasn't like Ricardo at all. He was the one who spoke little, but always stayed standing, always composed. Yet here he was, sitting on the cold floor of an institution, next to a boy he'd never seen before. They stayed like that for nearly half an hour, in silence. Juliana sat on the other side, and together they formed a small island of calm amid the chaos of the institution. They didn't force anything, didn't ask for anything. They were simply present, as if saying without words, "We're here. We're not leaving. You can trust us." And then, when Juliana was about to get up thinking it was time to go, something happened. The boy moved his hand, a tiny movement, almost imperceptible. His hand slid a few inches toward Ricardo. He didn't touch him, didn't take his hand, just moved closer, like a wild animal testing, probing, trying. Ricardo didn't move, barely breathed. He let that small hand stay there, just inches from his own. And in that moment, without anyone saying a word, all three of them knew that boy was theirs, and they were his. "My name is Tommaso." I only learned that later, when Ricardo and Juliana came to take me home. Home, a word that meant nothing to me. I'd lived in that institution for 4 years, and before that, somewhere else I couldn't remember. I didn't know what a home was, didn't know what a family was. I only knew that people came and went, that promises meant nothing, that it was better not to expect anything. That way, you didn't suffer. The journey to Bologna was silent. Juliana tried to talk to me, to point out things through the window, to tell me about my new room. I didn't respond. Not out of meanness, not out of defiance. I simply had no words. Words were a luxury I'd never been able to afford. In the institution, speaking meant attracting attention, and attention was never good. Speaking meant being noticed, and being noticed meant being vulnerable. The first months in the Bologna house were strange. Everything was too much space, too much silence, too much food, too much kindness. I didn't understand why these two people were so good to me. I waited for them to change, to get tired, to take me back. That's what always happened, right? People promised and then disappeared. That's how the world worked. Juliana tried to hug me, but I'd stiffen like a board. I didn't know how to be hugged, didn't know how to respond to that warmth. She'd read me bedtime stories, but I didn't listen. The words went in one ear and out the other, without leaving a trace. She'd make my favorite foods, but I ate mechanically, without taste, without pleasure. Food was just fuel. It had never been anything else. Ricardo was more discreet. He didn't push. He'd sit in the same room where I was, do his own things, let me be. Sometimes he'd look at me with those thoughtful eyes, and I'd look away. I didn't know what that look was searching for, didn't know what he wanted from me. At night I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake in the dark, eyes open, on alert. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow was a threat. My body was always tense, always ready to run or hide. I didn't have nightmares because I didn't sleep enough to dream. And when I did sleep, I dreamed of emptiness. A huge, endless void where I fell and fell without ever hitting bottom. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, Juliana would come to check if I was sleeping. I'd hear her approach the door, hear her stand there for a few minutes, hear her walk away. Once I saw her crying through the crack in the door, crying silently, her shoulders trembling. I didn't understand why she was crying. I didn't understand she was crying for me. Juliana and Ricardo never gave up, never. Even when I pushed them away, even when I gave them nothing in return, they kept being there. Every morning, Juliana made me breakfast. Every evening, Ricardo tucked me in. Every day, they told me they loved me. I didn't respond. I couldn't. But something, slowly, was starting to melt inside me, like ice in the sun. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but it was happening. Yet there was something that even their love couldn't reach. A part of me that remained closed, sealed, inaccessible. It was the part that had learned to survive. The part that knew trusting was dangerous, that loving hurt, that people always left you. That part didn't trust Juliana and Ricardo, didn't trust anyone. And as long as it stayed that way, I would never truly live. 6 months after my arrival, Juliana suggested a trip. "Let's go to Assisi," she said one evening at dinner. "It's a special place. Maybe it'll do us all some good." I didn't know what Assisi was, didn't know why it was special, but I saw something in Juliana's eyes, a hope so fragile and so strong at the same time that I couldn't say no. Not that I said yes. I simply said nothing, which was the most I could offer. Ricardo organized everything with his usual meticulousness. He booked a small hotel in the historic center, planned the visits, studied the routes, calculated travel times. That was his way of taking care of us, through practical details, concrete things. Juliana, meanwhile, talked about St. Francis, his love for animals and the poor, the peace you could feel in that city. "It's a place where miracles happen," she said one evening. "I can feel it." I listened without listening, watched without seeing. I didn't believe in miracles. I didn't believe in anything. I didn't know that trip would change everything. Didn't know that in a garden in that city, I would meet someone who would save my life. Someone who was no longer alive, yet more present than anyone I'd ever known. We arrived in Assisi on a May afternoon. The air was different there. Lighter, cleaner, as if the city itself breathed differently. The pink stone houses gleamed in the sunset light, and everywhere there were flowers. On balconies, in planters, along narrow alleys. There was a fragrance in the air, a mix of flowers and incense, and something I couldn't name, something ancient and eternal. Juliana was smiling, and even Ricardo seemed more relaxed, his shoulders less rigid than usual. "Do you feel that peace?" Juliana said, breathing deeply. I felt nothing, but I said nothing. I looked at everything with my usual suspicion. It was beautiful, yes, but beauty didn't touch me. Nothing touched me. I was like a closed window looking at a flowering garden without smelling the flowers. The first day we visited the Basilica of St. Francis. It was enormous, imposing, full of colorful frescoes telling stories I didn't know. Juliana explained the frescoes, told me the saint's story, showed me the tomb in the crypt. Francis was a rich young man, she told me, holding my hand. He had everything he could want, but he chose to give it all up to follow Jesus. He chose to be poor, to help the poor, to love everyone, even animals. He talked to birds, you know? I nodded, followed along, but felt nothing. It was like watching a movie in a language I didn't understand. The words reached me but had no meaning. The second day, we visited other churches, other sacred places. And during lunch, in a small trattoria overlooking the valley, Juliana told me a story. The story of a special young man. His name was Carlo Acutis, she said, her eyes shining. He was a boy from Milan, like us. He died last year, only 15 years old. But you know what he did? He loved Jesus so much, went to Mass every day, and used computers to tell the whole world about miracles. He said the Eucharist was his highway to heaven. I looked at her without really understanding. A boy who loved Jesus and computers, who died young. I didn't know why she was telling me this. You know what he always said? Juliana continued, stroking my head. He said we're all born originals, but many die as photocopies. He meant that each of us is special, unique. You too, Tommaso. You're special. I didn't feel special. I didn't feel anything, but I nodded, because that's what was expected of me. After lunch, Juliana wanted to visit another church, a small chapel dedicated to St. Francis. Ricardo went with her. I said I wanted to stay outside, in the little garden nearby. I was tired of churches, frescoes, stories of saints. I just wanted to be quiet. Juliana hesitated, but finally nodded. We'll stay close, she said. Don't wander off. I went outside and found myself in a small garden. There were flower beds with red and white roses, stone benches worn by time, a large tree casting shade. No one was there, just me, the flowers, the silence. I sat on a bench, tired without knowing why. The sun was warm, the air smelled of flowers, and for the first time in my memory, I felt calm. Not at peace, not yet, but calm, as if that place were telling me, it's all right, you're safe here. I closed my eyes. Just for a moment. Hi, Tommaso. I opened my eyes suddenly. Standing in front of me was a young man, tall, with dark curly hair, a big smile that lit up his whole face. He was wearing a red polo shirt and jeans, with a white backpack on his shoulders. I hadn't heard him approach, hadn't heard any footsteps, any sound. He was simply there, as if he had always been there. Who are you? I asked, and my voice came out stronger than usual. Almost normal. My name is Carlo, he said, sitting next to me on the bench. Carlo Acutis. Juliana told you about me at lunch, remember? I felt my heart stop, then restart, pounding like a drum in my ears. Carlo Acutis. The boy Juliana had talked about. The boy who had died the year before. But that one was dead. This one was alive. This one was smiling, breathing, speaking. This one was sitting next to me as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Don't be afraid, Carlo said, as if reading my thoughts. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here because I need to tell you something important. Something you've been waiting to hear for a long time, even if you didn't know it. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I just sat there, frozen, looking at this impossible boy. I know you don't trust, he continued. I know you're afraid. I know you think everyone will abandon you sooner or later, that it's better not to get attached to anyone, that love hurts. But you're wrong, Tommaso. You're completely wrong. There are people who will never abandon you. Ricardo and Juliana are two of those people. They chose you. They wanted you, and they never will stop. How did he know their names? How did he know about me? How did he know what I thought, what I felt, what I feared? I know everything about you, Carlo said, once again answering my unspoken thoughts. I know where you come from. I know what you've been through. I know why you don't speak and why you don't trust. I know about the nights you couldn't sleep in the darkness of the institution. I know about the times you hoped someone would come for you and then stopped hoping because it hurt too much. I know about the emptiness you feel inside, that void you think nothing will ever fill. And I also know that inside you, there's an enormous heart, a heart that's too afraid to beat. But the time has come. Tommaso, it's time to let yourself be loved. I felt tears fill my eyes. I never cried, ever. It was one of the first things I learned at the institution. Don't cry. Tears are useless. Tears make you weak. But those words, spoken by that voice, in that place, had opened something inside me I didn't know I had. Like a dam breaking. Why are you here? I managed to ask, my voice cracking. Carlo looked at me, and his smile changed. It became more serious, but no less kind. Deeper. I'm here because I need you, he said. You have a gift, Tommaso. A gift you don't know you have. For a while, you'll have the ability to sense things others can't sense, to know things others don't know. And this will allow you to help people, to save lives, not many, but the right ones, the ones that need to be saved. I didn't understand. I didn't understand anything. What does that mean? I asked. It means that sometimes you'll feel something, Carlo explained. A voice, an intuition, a sudden certainty, like a flash in the dark. And when it happens, you'll have to speak. You'll have to say what you sense, even if it seems strange, even if you're afraid, even if you think no one will believe you, because what you say will save people. It will protect them from bad things that would otherwise happen. But I don't speak, I said. I can't speak. The words don't come out. It's like there's a wall in my throat. I know, Carlo said, and he put a hand on my shoulder. It was warm, real, solid, like a real person's hand. But you'll learn. And do you know why you'll learn? Because you won't be alone anymore. Because you'll have a family. Because you'll have a reason to open up, to trust, to come out of that shell you've closed yourself in. The mission I'm giving you isn't just for others, Tommaso. It's for you too. It's mostly for you. The tears were falling now, and I couldn't stop them. They were tears I'd held back for years. Tears I didn't even know I had. Tears that washed, that cleansed, that healed. And that boy, that dead boy who was there in front of me, alive and smiling, looked at me with a tenderness I'd never known, tenderness I didn't know existed. I'm not here to turn you into something special, Carlo said. You're already special, Tommaso. You're special because you exist, because you're here, because your heart beats despite everything you've been through. You're special because you've survived, because you haven't given up, because you're still capable of hoping even though you try not to. I'm here to heal you, to help you get better. And the mission I'm giving you isn't a punishment, isn't a burden. It's a gift. Because through others, you'll learn to love. And by loving others, you'll learn to love yourself. And when the mission is over, I asked, barely audible. What happens then? When the mission is over, you'll be free, Carlo said. Free to just be a child. Free to play, to laugh, to love without fear. Free to live as you always should have lived. The mission will end, Tommaso. It won't last forever. It's just a bridge between the child you were and the child you're meant to become. For how long? I asked. Not too long, he said. Long enough to do what you need to do. Long enough to become who you're meant to become. And when the moment comes, you'll know. You'll feel light, free, ready, and the mission will end. And you'll still be here. You'll still be Tommaso, but you'll be a new Tommaso, a healed Tommaso. We sat in silence for a moment. The sun was lower now, the light more golden. I could hear birds singing, smell the flowers, feel the warmth of that hand on my shoulder. I felt the peace of that garden, and for the first time in my life, I felt something that resembled hope. Can I ask you something? I finally said. Of course. Why me? Why did you choose me? Carlo smiled again. That big, bright smile that seemed to light up everything. Because heaven doesn't choose the strong to work miracles, Tommaso. It chooses the small. It chooses those who know pain, because they're the ones who can recognize it in others. It chooses those who have been broken, because they're the ones who know what it means to be mended. You're perfect for this, not despite what you've been through, but precisely because of what you've been through. Your wound is your strength. Your silence will become your voice. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if what was happening was real or a dream. But in that moment, I didn't care. In that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt seen, truly seen. Seen as I'd never been seen before. I have to go now, Carlo said, standing up. But we'll see each other again, Tommaso. Not soon, not right away, but we'll see each other again. And when we do, you'll be different. You'll be healed. You'll be happy, and I'll be so proud of you. Carlo, I called out as he walked away. Thank you. He turned, smiled one more time, and said, Thank you, Tommaso, for having the courage to listen, for having the courage to hope. And then he was gone. He didn't walk away, didn't disappear. He simply wasn't there anymore, as if he'd never been. The bench beside me was still warm, and my heart was still full of what he'd told me. I looked around. The garden was empty. The sun was setting. I didn't know how much time had passed. "Tommaso!" It was Giuliana's voice. She was looking for me. Her voice sounded worried, almost frightened. "I'm here," I said, and my voice sounded different. Fuller, more present, more alive. Giuliana came running, her face worried. "We looked everywhere. Are you okay? Why are you crying?" I touched my face. It was wet with tears. I hadn't noticed. I looked at her, looked at this woman who had chosen me, wanted me, never given up despite my silence, my coldness, my rejection. And for the first time, I felt something in my chest. Something warm, something big, something alive, something I recognized without ever having felt it before. "I'm fine," I said. "I'm fine, Mom." Giuliana stopped cold, her eyes filled with tears. I'd never called her Mom. Never. In 6 months, I'd never used that word. She hugged me tight, so tight I could barely breathe. And I let her. For the first time, I didn't stiffen. For the first time, I hugged back. I held her like I'd never held anyone. Riccardo caught up with us shortly after. He looked at us, saw Giuliana's tears, saw my embrace, and understood that something had changed. He didn't say anything, didn't ask anything. He came close and hugged us both. We stayed like that, in that garden in Assisi, while the sun set. A family. Finally, a family. The change wasn't immediate. It wasn't magic. It was gradual, hard, beautiful. In the days following our return from Assisi, I started talking more. Not a lot, not all at once, but more. I answered questions, made comments, sometimes even started conversations. Giuliana and Riccardo didn't say anything, didn't want to ruin what was happening with too many words. But I saw the joy in their eyes. I saw it every time I opened my mouth, and then the intuitions began. The first time was about a month after Assisi. We were at lunch, a normal Sunday meal. Giuliana had made lasagna, the smell filling the whole house. Riccardo was reading the newspaper. I was eating quietly. And suddenly, I felt something. Not a voice, not exactly. It was more like a certainty, a knowledge that came from I don't know where, like a thought that wasn't mine, but was still in my head. "You shouldn't take the 4 o'clock train," I said. Giuliana and Riccardo looked at me, surprised. "What, sweetheart?" Giuliana asked, setting down her fork. "The 4 o'clock train, the one to Milan. You shouldn't take it." I didn't know why I was saying it, didn't know what it meant, but the words came out on their own, as if someone had put them in my mouth. Riccardo frowned. "How do you know about the train to Milan?" I didn't know. I didn't even know there was a train to Milan at 4, but the certainty was there, solid, unshakable, truer than anything else. "You have to tell the lady on the 3rd floor not to take it," I said. "It's important. It's urgent." Giuliana and Riccardo exchanged a look. The lady on the 3rd floor, Mrs. Bertini, visited her sister in Milan every Sunday. She always took the 4 o'clock train. "Tommaso," Giuliana said gently, "how do you know these things?" "I don't know," I said. "I just know. Please, please tell her." There was a long silence. Then Riccardo stood up. "I'll go talk to her," he said. I don't know why he did it. I don't know why he believed me, but he did. Without asking more questions, without demanding explanations. He trusted me. Mrs. Bertini at first thought they were crazy. Why would she change her plans because of a 7-year-old's feeling? "But that's absurd," she said. "I already have my ticket. My sister is expecting me." But Riccardo insisted. He told her he couldn't explain why, but he felt it was important. The woman, perhaps struck by the seriousness of this usually reserved man, agreed to take the later train. "Just to make you happy," she said, shaking her head. That evening, on the news, we saw the report. The 4 o'clock train to Milan had derailed shortly after Bologna. A brake failure, a curve taken too fast. 14 seriously injured. 2 dead. Giuliana put her hands over her mouth. Riccardo went pale. I watched the screen without really understanding, but knowing, somehow, that this was why I had spoken. This was why I had to speak. Mrs. Bertini came to see us the next day. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling. She hugged me so tight it almost hurt. "You saved my life," she kept saying, sobbing. "That child saved my life. How did he know? How?" I didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do, so I stayed silent in her embrace, feeling her tears on my neck. And for the first time, I understood what it meant to help someone, understood what it meant to make a difference. That was just the beginning. In the following months, the intuitions continued. They weren't frequent, weren't regular. They came when they needed to, without warning, without logic. Sometimes weeks passed with nothing. Then suddenly, that certainty, that voice inside me that knew. Once we were at the park. I was sitting on a swing without swinging, watching other children run and play. I was still a bit detached, still a bit distant, but less and less. Always less. And suddenly, I felt that certainty again, strong as a punch. "The boy in the yellow shirt," I said to Juliana, who was sitting on a bench nearby. "He shouldn't climb the tall structure. Now, right now." Juliana didn't ask for explanations. She'd learned not to ask. She jumped up, went to the boy's mother, said something urgently. The woman seemed confused, almost offended, but Juliana insisted, with that gentle strength she had. And the woman finally called her son, who was about to climb the tallest structure in the playground. "Marco, come here." The boy climbed down, pouting. 30 seconds later, that structure collapsed. A piece of rusted metal came loose and fell exactly where the boy would have been. It would have fallen on his head. It would have killed him. The mother screamed. The boy cried. Everyone gathered to look, but no one was hurt. No one was dead. The woman came to Juliana, pale as a ghost. "How did you know?" she asked. "How did you both know?" Juliana looked at me. She didn't know what to say, so she just said, "My son knew." There was a winter evening when we were coming home after visiting Juliana's parents. It was late. The road was dark and deserted. Ricardo was driving carefully because it had snowed, and the ice was treacherous. Juliana had fallen asleep in the passenger seat. I was in the back, half asleep too, watching the lights pass by. And then I heard that voice inside me, stronger than ever, like a shout. "Dad, stop! Now! Stop right now!" Ricardo looked at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes met mine. He didn't ask why. He braked, pulled over, stopped on the side of the road. The car slid a little on the ice, but came to a stop. Juliana woke with a start. "What's happening? Why did we stop?" "Tommaso told me to stop," Ricardo said. "What is it, Tommaso?" "I don't know," I said. "Wait." We stayed still for maybe 30 seconds. A minute. The engine humming, the heater blowing, the silence of the night. And then we saw it. A huge truck, without lights, came barreling around the curve at breakneck speed. It was taking up the entire road, like a crazed monster. If we'd been on that road, it would have hit us. We wouldn't have stood a chance. Juliana screamed. Ricardo muttered under his breath, which he never did. I stayed silent, watching that truck disappear into the night, feeling my heart pounding in my ears. "Tommaso," Ricardo said, his voice shaking, turning to look at me. "That thing you have, whatever it is, thank you, my son." It was the first time he called me my son, not Tommaso, my son. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say, but that night, for the first time, I truly understood that my mission was real. It wasn't a game, wasn't imagination. It was something big, something important, and I was part of it all. But the intuitions, as important as they were, weren't the biggest thing happening. The biggest thing was quieter, deeper, more invisible. I was healing. Little by little, day by day, my defenses crumbled. I started to play, first alone, then with classmates. At first, I stayed on the margins, watching others. Then I began to participate, to run, to hide, to seek, to laugh. I started to laugh, at first quietly, almost under my breath, a sound that surprised me every time, then louder and louder. One day, Juliana heard me laughing from the kitchen while I was watching cartoons, and she came to see what was happening. When she saw me there on the couch, laughing, she started to cry. "Why are you crying, Mom?" I asked her. "Because I'm happy," she said. "I'm so happy." I started to talk, not just about important things, not just about intuitions. I talked about everything. about what I'd done at school, about cartoons I liked, about my dreams for the future. I talked about what I'd eaten, what I wanted to eat. I talked about my classmates, my teachers, the books I was reading. I talked and talked, as if I had to make up for all the years of silence. Riccardo and Giuliana watched this transformation with wonder. The boy they'd taken from the institution, that silent and frightened child with empty eyes, was disappearing. In his place was another boy, a living, full, present boy. A boy who laughed, who hugged, who asked, who loved. And I felt that everything was connected. The intuitions, the healing, the mission, they were all part of the same design. Carlo had told me, through others, I would learn to love. And he was right. Every time an intuition saved someone, I felt a little less useless, a little less invisible, a little more part of something. I was no longer the abandoned child. I was Tommaso Ferrante, son of Riccardo and Giuliana, and I had a reason to be here. I had a place in the world. I had a family. The mission lasted almost a year of intuitions, of warnings, of lives saved. And then, one April morning, I woke up and knew it was over. There was no announcement, no sign, just a feeling, a lightness I'd never felt before, as if someone had lifted a weight from my shoulders I didn't even know I was carrying, as if a door had opened, and on the other side there was only light. That morning I came down to breakfast, and Giuliana looked at me strangely. "There's something different about you today," she said. "I don't know what, but something." I didn't know how to explain it to her, so I simply said, "I think it's over." "What's over, sweetheart?" "The mission, what I had to do. I think I did it." Giuliana didn't say anything. She hugged me, gently, as if afraid of breaking me, and I let her, as I always did now. From that day on, the intuitions didn't come anymore. I didn't miss them. I didn't look for them. They had been a temporary gift, a bridge between the child I was and the child I was becoming. And now, that bridge was no longer needed. I had crossed over, but the change remained. Everything I had learned, everything I had felt, everything I had become, that stayed forever. That evening, as I was falling asleep, I felt something. Not an intuition, not a warning. It was more like a presence, a feeling of not being alone, like an invisible embrace. And then, in my half-sleep, I heard a voice. His voice. "You did well, Tommaso." I opened my eyes, but there was no one there. Yet I knew it was him, Carlo, the boy from the garden. "You're free now," the voice said, so gentle, so warm. Free to just be a child, to play, to laugh, to love, to live. That was the real miracle, Tommaso. Not the lives you saved, yours. I smiled in the dark. For the first time in my life, I felt complete. "Thank you, Carlo," I whispered. "Thank you," the voice replied. "We'll see each other again. Someday we'll see each other again." And then silence. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was a full silence, full of peace, gratitude, love. I fell asleep, and for the first time in my life, I dreamed beautiful things. Nearly 18 years have passed since that night. 18 years in which I finally lived the life Carlo promised me. A normal life, full, wonderful in its ordinariness. I finished school with good grades. I made true, deep, lasting friendships. I remember my first friend, Luca, a boy with glasses too big for his face and a contagious laugh. He taught me to play soccer, even though I was terrible at it. He taught me that losing was normal and that losing didn't mean you were less. We're still friends today. He was the best man at my wedding. Yes, I got married. I met Elena in college during a developmental psychology course. She had this laugh that filled rooms and a way of looking at the world that made me want to see it through her eyes. The first time I told her my story, my whole story, she didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she took my hand and said, "How lucky Riccardo and Giuliana were to find you." Not how lucky you were, how lucky they were. In that moment, I knew I would marry her. We have 2 children now, Marco and Chiara. Marco is 4 and looks like Riccardo, quiet, thoughtful, with a gaze that always seems to be thinking about something deep. Chiara is 2 and is a tornado of energy and words, just like Elena. When I look at them, when I see them running in the yard of our house, when I hear them laugh and throw tantrums and then hug each other, I think about how strange fate is. I was a child who didn't know what a family was, and now I've built my own. I had my first crush in middle school on a red-headed girl who didn't even know I existed. I had my first kiss at 16, awkward and embarrassing and perfect. I had my first broken heart at 18, when the girl I thought was the love of my life left me for my classmate. I lived all those normal things that normal children live, those things I once thought would never be for me. And every time I lived something new, something normal, I thought of Carlo. I thought of that garden. I thought about how right he had been. I went to college, studied developmental psychology, because I wanted to understand children like me. I wanted to help them the way I was helped. It wasn't easy. There were hard exams, sleepless nights over books, moments when I wanted to quit everything. But then, I'd think of that boy sitting in the hallway of the institution, knees pulled to his chest. And I kept going. For him. For all those like him. Today, I work at a residential home for children on the outskirts of Bologna. It's called House of Hope, and it hosts children ages 3 to 18 who for various reasons can't stay with their families. Some were abandoned, like me. Others were removed from violent or inadequate parents. Still others have lost everyone and have no one. Every child I see with that empty look I once had reminds me of who I was and who I became. There's one boy in particular right now. His name is Pietro. He's 7, and he doesn't speak, not because he can't, but because he's chosen not to, like I had chosen. When I look at him, I see myself, and I try to be for him what Riccardo and Giuliana were for me. I don't force anything. I sit next to him. I wait, and little by little, very slowly, that wall is starting to crumble. I never tell the children my complete story. I don't talk about Carlo, the intuitions, the garden, but I tell them one thing, that silence isn't forever, that wounds heal, that there's someone, somewhere, waiting for them, and that they deserve to be loved. All of them, always. Giuliana and Riccardo are still here, older, with gray hair and wrinkles that tell of a life lived, but still the same, still themselves, still my parents. They're doting grandparents now, and seeing how they look at Marco and Chiara fills my heart with a joy that has no words. It's as if the circle has closed. The love they gave me is continuing, through me, to my children. A few years ago, my father had a heart problem. A mild heart attack, the doctors said. Nothing serious, but enough to scare us all. I took him to the hospital, held his hand while we waited for results. It was the first time I'd seen him vulnerable, fragile. That man who had always been a rock for me. A certainty was there in a hospital bed, pale and tired. And I was there beside him, as he had been beside me so many times. When the doctors told us everything would be fine, that with some precautions he'd live a long time yet, he looked at me. He looked at me with those same eyes that had looked at me in the hallway of the institution so many years before. And he said, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Tommaso. You and your mother. You're my life." I cried that day, like I had cried in the garden of Assisi so many years before. But these were different tears. No longer tears of a broken child discovering hope. These were tears of a man who understands how much he has been loved and how much he has learned to love. A few years ago, I returned to Assisi, alone this time. Elena understood I needed to make that journey alone. "Go," she said, kissing my forehead. "Say hello to him for me." Because she too knows Carlo now. She'd never met him, would never meet him, but she knows him through me, through my story, through the man I became, because of him. I took the train from Bologna, the same train I'd taken with Giuliana and Riccardo so many years before. I watched the landscape scroll past the window, and memories washed over me like waves. I remembered the boy I was during that first trip, silent, frightened, unable to see beauty. And I thought about the man I am now, a husband, a father, someone who had learned to live. When I arrived in Assisi, it was a May day, just like that first time. The sun was shining, the air smelled of flowers, and the pink stone city seemed to glow with its own light. I walked through the narrow alleys, recognizing some corners. discovering others. Everything had changed, and nothing had changed. Time had passed, but Assisi was always the same, eternal, unchanging. But there was something new this time, something that didn't exist during my first trip. In 2019, Carlo's body had been transferred to the Sanctuary of the Renunciation. In 2020, he was beatified. The boy I had met in that garden 18 years before had become Blessed Carlo Acutis. One step from sainthood, I entered the sanctuary with my heart pounding. There were many people, pilgrims from all over the world, come to see his body, now displayed in a glass case. His story had been told in documentaries and books. His tomb had become a pilgrimage destination. But for me, he was still the boy in the red polo shirt who had sat down next to me on a bench. I stopped in front of the case. It was the first time I'd seen his body. During that first trip, he had recently died, and his body was still buried elsewhere. But now he was here, young, serene, with the air of someone who knows something others don't. He was wearing his normal clothes, as Juliana had described to me long ago, as I had seen him, in the garden. "Hi, Carlo," I whispered, so softly no one could hear me. "I came back, like I promised. I came to thank you for everything." I didn't expect an answer. I wasn't looking for one, but as I stood there, in front of that glass, surrounded by other pilgrims in prayer, I felt that presence again, that feeling of not being alone, that certainty, warm and luminous, that he was there, not in the body behind the glass, in something greater, in something that has no name but is real, more real than anything I've ever touched. And I smiled, a full, free, grateful smile, the smile of a man who knows he has been loved, who knows he has been saved, who knows that miracles exist, because he is living proof. I went out to the garden. It was spring. The flowers were blooming. The sun was shining. I sat on the same bench from so many years before, and I stayed there, in silence, remembering the frightened child I was, remembering the encounter that changed me, remembering the intuitions, the lives saved, the mission accomplished, remembering the healing, slow and silent, that transformed me, and giving thanks for everything, for every moment, for every tear and every laugh, for Juliana and Ricardo, for Carlo, for the life I had the courage to live. Perhaps the true miracle of this story wasn't the warnings. It wasn't the lives saved. It wasn't even the impossible events that happened during that period of my childhood. Perhaps the true miracle was a child wounded by abandonment who found, for a brief moment, a purpose, and then received something even rarer, permission to just be a child again. Whether it was imagination or divine intervention, no one can prove, but what could be seen was real. Lives preserved, a family transformed, and a heart healed. Because sometimes heaven doesn't choose the strong to work miracles. It chooses the small. And when the mission ends, the greatest miracle happens in silence. If this story has touched your heart, ask for the intercession of Blessed Carlo Acutis in your prayers. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss other testimonies that inspire our faith.